Welcome to NTD China News. I'm Karen Chang. Making headlines this Tuesday, January 22nd. Is Japan seeking to ease the island's dispute tension with China? Why the Philippines is suing the Chinese regime? And forums in Canada examine forced organ harvesting in China. Things have been heating up between Japan and China over a chain of uninhabited islands in the East China Sea. Today, a Japanese envoy arrived in Beijing in what looks like a bid to ease tensions and shelving the sovereignty dispute.
A week after the Chinese military received a directive to train for war, an envoy of Japan's newly elected Prime Minister Shinzo Abe arrived in Beijing. Natsuo Yamaguchi was there to deliver a message. He carried a letter from Prime Minister Abe that sought to diffuse the tension between the two Asian nations over the territorial dispute of a string of islands in the East China Sea. Yamaguchi will be in Beijing for 4 days. During that time, he'll try to secure meetings with top Chinese officials and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. This is the first time a Japanese lawmaker has visited China since Abe came to power in December. Despite calls for war among some Chinese officials, others seek to neutralize the situation. The head of China's top political advisory body, Jia Qingling, has been calling for talks between the two sides. Yamaguchi's visit could be a step in that direction. According to the Financial Times, Yamaguchi suggested the dispute should be shelved and be left for future generations to resolve. Officially, though, neither side has shown any indication of backing down from their sovereignty claim over the disputed Diaoyu or Senkaku Islands.
The Philippines is seeking legal help in its row with China in a long-standing dispute over territory in the South China Sea. The Philippines is calling on the United Nations to moderate the dispute, which has gone unresolved for years. Here's more.
On Tuesday, the Philippines asked the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea to play mediator with China. The Chinese regime has claimed a significant portion of the South China Sea. For years, it has been in conflict with the Philippines over islands believed to sit atop rich reserves of oil and natural gas.
The Philippines is requesting the arbitral tribunal to issue an award that, among others, declares that China's maritime claims in the South China Sea, based on its so-called 9-dash line, are contrary to UNCLOS and invalid.
Due to the Philippines' size and political authority, it has had a hard time standing up to its big Asian neighbor. The Chinese regime has resisted calls to settle the dispute on a multilateral basis. Instead, it is insisting on a one-on-one approach so that it can exercise its leverage over individual countries. The Philippines is not backing down.
Philippines has exhausted almost all political and diplomatic avenues for a peaceful negotiated settlement of its maritime dispute with China. On numerous occasions dating back to 1995, the Philippines has been exchanging views with China to peacefully settle these disputes. To this day, a solution is still elusive.
And the Philippines is not the only one that is in dispute with China over the South China Sea. Taiwan, Vietnam, Brunei, and Malaysia all dispute China's claims. There has been no immediate response from Beijing on the Philippines' request.
A U.S. congressman recently told NTD that he believes the allegation of forced organ harvesting in China is being underreported in the West. Over the weekend, a Canadian human rights lawyer attended 2 separate events to raise awareness of the state-sanctioned transplant abuse.
Canadian human rights lawyer David Meadows is at the forefront of a global effort to end a human rights atrocity happening inside China, forced organ harvesting. Over the weekend, David Meadows spoke in Calgary, Canada. The forum sought to raise awareness about the organ harvesting allegations. The largest group of victims identified so far has been practitioners of Falun Gong. It's a meditation practice persecuted by the Chinese regime.
Those who did the exercises after 1999 were arrested and asked to denounce the practice. Those who did not were tortured. Those who refused to recant after torture disappeared. David Kilgore and I concluded that many of the disappeared were killed for their organs.
Dr. Sean Wu is a member of the global medical activist group, Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting. He presented evidence on China's transplant business, in particular, the Chinese regime's failure to properly explain the source of thousands of uncounted organs used in transplants. Human rights abuses in China have relevance in Canada. At a related forum on Saturday at the University of Alberta, member of the Legislative Assembly, Dr. David Swan, highlighted how Chinese state-run companies are also involved in human rights abuses. For example, Chinese oil giant CNOOC recently was approved for purchase of Canadian oil producer Nexen.
The Chinese National Oil Company, has been involved with some of this discrimination and persecution of Falun Gong practitioners. What can you do? You can do a lot. If you simply contact your member of parliament, who is influential in our federal government, that is a very important start.
David Meadows, who also attended the Saturday forum, stressed what he believes should be the priority of Canadian-Sino relations.
Raising business issues, you address human rights concern and put human rights first.
The forced organ harvesting allegations against the Chinese regime has been brought to the attention of the United Nations and the United States Congress. Other than Falun Gong adherents, other alleged victims include religious prisoners like House Christians, Tibetans, and Muslim Uyghurs. NTD News, Canada.
And coming up after the break, Chinese netizens captured by President Obama's inauguration, and an eye-popping talent that might have you shutting your eyes. Welcome back. For a long time now, most citizens in China have known about the 50-Cent Party. This is a group of people employed by the Chinese Communist Party to post propaganda on China's internet. But what some residents may not know is that possibly 1 in 10 people in Beijing is part of this army. Here's more.
Imagine that you're a netizen in Beijing with an account on China's version of Twitter, Weibo. And imagine that of the 10 people you follow on Weibo, one of them works for Beijing's propaganda office. Well, that's just what Beijing's vice mayor, Liu Wei, who also happens to be the city's propaganda chief, said last Thursday, according to the Beijing News. Liu urged the city's 2.06 million propaganda employees, or 1 in 10 people in Beijing, to open accounts on social media. The move, he said, would help to, quote, spread positive energy by influencing opinion on hot topics. Of the group, 60,000 work for the government, 2 million are enlisted citizens. Sarah Cook, a senior researcher with U.S.-based Freedom House, says despite the online propaganda army, it might not break people's trust in social media.
You know, if you're getting your news, right, from someone who you know has a track record, who you've been following for a while, who you know is a professor, who you know is either an activist or a lawyer, someone who for whatever reason you're trusting, right, the information that they're sharing, I don't think that would really change.
Still, Cook says this group of paid propaganda workers can foster distrust.
At first, when people would just write comments that were very pro-government or pro-party, then they would get called out on it by the other bloggers who would basically call them the 50-Cent Party, and would say, oh, you're just shilling for the government. But then you start to see things that are much more insidious, where people are producing misinformation. So they'll make up some kind of fact and say something was going on.
Finding out how many propaganda officials are amongst them did not go down well with Chinese citizens. According to the Chinese edition of the Epoch Times newspaper, one blogger wrote, quote, so horrible, 1/10 of Beijing's population are propaganda workers, unquote. And it can't be cheap to maintain this large group of people. Referring to the 50-Cent Party, another blogger wrote, no wonder we have such high taxes. The number 2.06 million has now been censored on Weibo. That's the same with comments relating to the Beijing News article. Holly Kellum, NTD News, New York.
The eyes of the world were intently watching what happened in Washington, D.C. yesterday, the second swearing-in of U.S. President Barack Obama. People crowded the National Mall in the nation's capital, bearing witness to the spectacle. But one part of the ceremony has the Chinese internet abuzz. What was it?
Yesterday, U.S. President Barack Obama's inauguration was held on the steps of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. It marked the start of his second term in office. Half a world away, Chinese people were glued to the ceremony. They've recently seen their own leadership transition, and it was a completely different affair. This particular part of Obama's inauguration caught the attention of Chinese netizens. As the president placed his left hand on the Bible, he swore to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution. To the Chinese public, living in an officially atheist country, the role of religion in establishing the rule of law is thought-provoking. Weibo user by the name of WuGo1975 has more than 50,000 followers. He noted that Obama's oath was given to a court justice, not Congress. He swore on the Bible, not the Constitution. He wrote, quote, "This is the secret of America's constitutional democracy. It's not just the Constitution or the government's separation of powers. Above that is natural law, guarded by a grand justice, and below is a community of Christians unified by their belief." Another Weibo user wrote, quote, "If Chinese officials were to swear an oath of office, what would they swear on?" China's ruling Communist Party is officially atheist. While it does allow non-party members to be religious, worship can only be done in state-sanctioned establishments. Outside of these, religious followers are suppressed and persecuted. The moral fabric of communist officials and the society at large has also been weighing on the Chinese public. A string of corruption scandals and social tragedies have led to periods of soul-searching. A Weibo user comments, quote, "A country without religion is a country in chaos. A nation without belief is one where deceit becomes the norm." Obama's inauguration became one of the trending topics on Sina Weibo. In all, more than 25 million on the subject flooded the space.
And before we go today, a look at a man with unique, if not freakish, talent. Be warned, it isn't pretty. Meet Wang Xianxiang. He's seen here at a talent show over the weekend in Hunan province, lifting 2 buckets of water with his eyelids. That's right, attached to the bottom of Wang's eyes are 2 plastic hanger hooks. On the bottom, water with a combined weight of 9 pounds. Ouch. That's not all he can do. Wang can also blow up, literally a balloon, not with his mouth, but with his nostrils. But going back to those eyes, Wang says he's not happy with what they can do now. According to NBC News, he wants to train so that by the end of the year he can hold 11 pounds with each lid. But for most of you watching, I think it's safe to say we've seen quite enough. And that's all for this broadcast of NTD China News. For more on China-related topics, visit our website at ntd.tv or subscribe to our YouTube channel, NTD on China. Coming up next is China Focus with Shelley Zhang. Stay tuned.